Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today on Grammaticus Books, we are going inside of people's brains. We're going into their minds. Specifically, we're going into the mind of Philip K. Dick, that cutting-edge author of new wave science fiction. And we're going to see if his mental state, if his mind altered over the time of his career, over the course of his career. It did. And if that alteration in his mental state, as he was writing over the decades, if that had any corresponding impact on his writing, and if his writing changed over the course of his career, and what effect it had on that writing. And it did. And in addition to that, we're going to go into the brain of Grammaticus. Yes, I know that's a very scary place. We're going to go inside of my brain, and we're going to see if my mind has changed about Philip K. Dick. Because I just finished a deep dive into Philip K. Dick. I just finished 5 novels by Philip K. Dick that I read over the last couple of weeks. 2 of those were collections of short stories, and then 3 of those were full-length novels. And we're going to see if my opinion, in my mind, on Philip K. Dick as a writer changed as a consequence of reading those 5 books in this deep dive. Because my opinion of Philip K. Dick as a writer was that he was not very good, to be blunt. That's not based on a large sample size going in. I will tell you once we get to that point exactly why I felt that Philip K. Dick was not a very good writer and why I decided to do this deep dive. But let's talk for a little bit here about the man himself, Philip K. Dick. He was born in Chicago in 1928. He died in California in 1982 at the age of 53. He died very young, and he died tragically right before the movie Blade Runner was released, which sparked this Philip K. Dick renaissance. And then over the course of his lifetime, he was writing primarily in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He produced 40 novels, over 120 short stories. He won 3 Hugos and a whole bevy of Nebula Awards. But he also had mental issues that were going on in his life over the course of his career. And you can see it in the progression of his stories over the decades as he was writing. And when he first started off, when he first started writing stories in the 1940s, he was already mentally ill. According to Philip K. Dick himself, he was battling mental illness from a very early age, and part of that could be because when he was born in 1928, he was born with a twin sister, but his twin sister died at 6 weeks, and his parents had his twin sister buried, and on the headstone for his twin sister, they put down her name, they put down her date of birth and her date of death, and on the same tombstone, they then put Philip K. Dick's name, his date of birth, and just left off the date of death on the tombstone in the graveyard from the time that he was a very young child. And that has to mess with your mind a little bit. It's probably not enough to drive you into serious mental illness issues, but I think it could be indicative of the household that he was reared in, and maybe there were some other issues going on there, and that was just a symptom of those issues that perhaps caused some of this mental challenges that he was struggling on when he started writing in the 1950s. And in the 50s, he has another problem that he brings on himself. He is writing for the publishers, and the publishers are not paying him royalties, meaning that in order to pay the bills, he has to produce a large volume of work because he doesn't get any royalties off of sales from these books. There's no long-term revenue being generated. So he continually has to crank out books. And he claims that this was the reason why he started taking amphetamines. But to be brutally honest, Philip K. Dick did a lot of drugs. He didn't limit it to amphetamines, and he didn't limit it just to doing amphetamines in order to help him work. He did a large amounts of drugs, but he claimed that he needed to take those amphetamines in order to produce the volume of work and to keep his brain going. And he was taking large, copious amounts of amphetamines for long periods of time, for decades on end. And when you take amphetamines in that volume, it will affect your brain. It will cause psychoses within the brain if you're taking that much amphetamines. And in fact, it did cause psychoses, which became worse and worse throughout his life as he moved forward. And you can see that psychoses reflected more and more strongly within his works as his works moved forward. In the 1950s, he's writing stories that are generally pretty much plot-driven. They have interesting twists at the end of them, and they frequently bring into his stories that concept that reality might be shifting underneath the viewer's feet, which would become a mainstay and a theme of him going forward in almost all of his novels. But by the 1960s, by the end of the 1960s and into the 1970s, this has just gone full-blown, and he has created a subgenre called paranoid science fiction, where he is just writing about these mental states of these main characters who are absolutely in a paranoid state. They are drug addicted frequently, and a lot of it is largely autobiographical. Novels such as Ubik, A Scanner Darkly, which we'll go into here in a little more depth shortly, and Valis are all novels that would fall into this category. There is a bit of a ray of hope here, though, in this story here with Philip K. Dick, because in 1974, his mental state altered once again. He was in a state of severe psychosis. He was having these paranoid episodes. He was having these psychotic episodes, which could become very severe. He had 5 wives by the time he was, I think, 43. He was on his 5th wife. He allegedly had tried to kill his 3rd wife by locking her into a car and then pushing the car over a cliff. He later had that wife committed to a mental asylum based in part upon his testimony in court. And later after that, he did attempt to commit suicide by crashing his car and killing himself in the wreck while his girlfriend was still in the car. So he had severe mental issues that were episodic in nature. But in 1974, something happens that alters that. Something happens that alters his brain. And Philip K. Dick says that what happened is that an alien superintelligence came down out of the universe and took up residence inside of his mind. And it showed him the true meaning of beauty, and it brought him a measure of peace and a measure of tranquility that he had never experienced in his life until this alien took up residence inside of his mind and altered his whole fundamental being to the point where he could actually relax and look back on things and enjoy things without these psychotic episodes. Now, do I think an alien being actually took up residence in his brain? No. I think the amount of amphetamines probably burned out some connectors there, but burned it out in a favorable manner for him. And God bless him, if that brought him some measure of peace, then I'm thankful for it. He did die in 1982. He died from complications from stroke on a weakened cardiovascular system. And unfortunately, that is another one of the effects of taking large amounts of amphetamines. It stresses your cardiovascular system, and that probably was a major factor contributing to his death. So now we get to Grammaticus, we get to myself here, and my opinion of Philip K. Dick has been, all the way leading up to this video, is that he was not a very good writer. I didn't care for him at all. And will tell you what that is based upon, or what that was based upon. It was based upon me reading a number of his novels in high school and not caring for them. But here in the year 2025, decades here in the future, I could not tell you the name of a single one of those novels or even give you an idea of what the plot was. That's just my general lingering impression, was that I had read his works and I just didn't care for them. Also, adding to that, about 4 years ago, before I started my BookTube channel, before I even knew that BookTube existed, I decided to read this novel here, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And the reason I wanted to read this novel is because it is the basis for one of my favorite science fiction movies of all time, one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time, Blade Runner. And I wanted to read the backstory to it. So I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was published in 1968, and I didn't like it. Not only did I not like it, my opinion of it is that it is a poorly written book. That is how I felt about it there about 4 years ago when I read this book. And I think that Ridley Scott went in and wisely pulled out the core idea of that book, jettisoned everything else because it's very badly written, and then built up his own story around that core idea, making his own story here for Blade Runner, which is what turned this into one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time. Then flash forward here to the year 2025. I have a BookTube channel. I've discovered BookTube, and I have a number of booktubers who specialize in vintage science fiction, and they are singing the praises of Philip K. Dick. And these are booktubers who I've been watching their videos for over a year. I know their opinions. I respect their and value their opinions greatly. And they persuaded me to give Philip K. Dick another try because their praise of him was so great. And I was like, I can't remember, what I read of his back in high school. I've got only one other book as a sample size here to go off of. I need to give him another try. So I finished 5 novels by Philip K. Dick. And I'm going to tell you if those 5 novels have changed my opinion about him as an author, or has my mental state stayed stable, that will be here right at the end of the video. So let's get into these books. We're going to take these books in the order I read them, which was roughly the chronological order in which they were written by Philip K. Dick, sort of charting his career as an author, and it's going to be interesting. So the first novel is a collection of short stories that he published in the early to mid 1950s, and it's called The Defender and Other Stories. And again, this is a collection of short stories from the early 50s when the start of his career was going, and I read it through from front to back, and I was impressed. They were good stories. These are solid stories that are collected here in this book. I'll put a picture of it up over here. And I did like and enjoy these stories. And you can see where Philip K. Dick is starting to build up this theme that is going to run concurrent through the rest of his career, that is going to take on deeper and deeper meaning and deeper significance in his later novels, where he starts to question reality. And most of these stories have what my coworker and friend Phil would call is a little monkey paw twist right at the end of them. And frequently you can see this monkey paw twist coming from a mile away, but it doesn't detract from your enjoyment of these stories, or it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the stories. So let me give you an example of the titular story here, The Defenders. This is after a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union that has wiped out all life on the surface of the planet and has driven everybody down into subterranean cities. The surface of Earth is uninhabitable because of all the radiation from the nuclear exchanges, but the war continues, and the war is continuing, being waged by autonomous robots that each side has created that run the munitions factories that go up onto the surface of the Earth. They launch missiles back and forth, and then they take battle damage reports of the rubble that they've rearranged in this ongoing war. And they are defending each other's nations, the Soviet Union and the United States of America. But is what's being reported by these robots actually what's happening on the surface? And the people underneath here, the citizens of what's left of the Soviet Union and the United States of America, slowly start to realize that maybe this is not what is happening. And it's an excellent story, and it's very exemplary of the other stories that are contained here within this first novel that I read. So we're off to a good start here in the 1950s. From that, I went to the next collection of short stories, which was called Minority Report and Other Stories by Philip K. Dick, very original titles. And this contained 4 novellas that were written in the 1950s and the early 1960s. And those novellas were Minority Report, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, Paycheck, and the 4th one is, I'm going to have to look at my notes real quick, Second Variety. That was the 4th story. I had to think about that one. These are fantastic novellas here contained within this novel by Philip K. Dick. Again, these are written in the mid to late 50s and the early 60s. You can see where he has progressed as a writer, where he had that solid background in Defenders and now in Minority Report. He is just hitting it out of the park with all 4 of these novellas. Paycheck was turned into a movie in 2003, starring Ben Affleck, and was directed by John Woo. Minority Report, of course, had that movie by Tom Cruise in 2009. By the way, I hate that movie. I don't like to use the word hate, but in this case, I'm going to make an exception. I hate that movie, but the story was absolutely phenomenal. I went into reading that story thinking that it was going to be cringe because of the movie had tainted my opinion of it, and I came out of it thinking, man, they should have just stuck to the story Minority Report. It was so much better than the movie. And then, of course, you have We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which formed the basis of the movie Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That is a fantastic story. I'm happy to report that the movie with Schwarzenegger did stay much more faithful to the original story than Minority Report did, and it is very good. There are differences, and I think you had to make some differences in order to put it up on the screen for Hollywood, but the story is excellent again. And then you have the final novella in this book here, which is called Second Variety, which was definitely a huge influence upon the movie Terminator and the whole Terminator series, with these machines that have been developed between, again, the Soviet Union and the United States in this war. This is a common theme that recurs over and over here with Philip K. Dick, and it is excellent. This was just an outstanding novel here by Philip K. Dick. This collection of novellas called Minority Report and Others that I would strongly recommend to anybody. And I think it really shows Philip K. Dick as he's come into the height of his powers as an author and as a writer. And again, you have that recurring theme that reality is not quite what it seems to the viewer, and you can have different viewpoints on what reality is depending upon who is looking at it. And he really starts to develop that and make the most out of that theme within these stories in that book. So from there, I needed to move on to a full novel. And I was recommended to me by a number of booktubers on their channels that I should start with this one right here, which is Time Out of Joint, which was originally published in 1959, this 1959 book, and it is often referenced as a good entry point for Philip K. Dick. I started into it, and immediately it had a lot of elements in science fiction that I don't care for. It was set in modern times. It's set in the 1950s in a small town United States of America. It has just ordinary plain people as the main characters in the book, and it is not plot driven. It is more of a character study, and I loved it. It was really enjoyable. It was very well developed. This is a 3-act book. You have the opening act, you have a center act, and you have a final act here, the typical setup for a novel. And acts 1 and 2 are phenomenal, where Philip K. Dick has put this group of people into this small town. The main character is named Raggle Gum. He lives with a family and some friends here in small town America, and every day he gets a newspaper and he enters this newspaper contest in order to basically solve this puzzle. And every single day he wins this puzzle contest for this newspaper. And as he's living here in this town, as he's working these newspaper puzzles, he starts to realize that there are cracks in his reality living here in small town America. And then he and his family and his friends, step by step, they determine that their life is not what it seems, that their entire existence has not been what it seems, that it has been some type of a fabrication by unknown forces, and it builds up this absolutely radical sense of disbelief and suspense, coming up to the reveal to what their actual reality is. And then you get to the reveal. And at that point, the story stumbles. The reveal by Philip K. Dick here in the final act of the book, it's trite, it's mundane, it's pedantic, it's a political theme that's been done over and over to death, and it falls on its face a little bit here in the final act of the book. And as I read this, it was very disappointing to me that I thought that he wasn't able to continue this great tension that he had built up in the first 2 acts of the book and carry it off with a good, great reveal that was going to be radical enough in order to live up to those expectations that he had built in the front half of the book. And he just failed on that front. And I started thinking, is this me? Is it just me thinking that he had failed here at the very end of the book? And then I read the afterword. And then you have this afterword here by Lou Stathis, a friend and a co-writer who worked with Philip K. Dick, talking about the main character, Raggle Gum, and this reveal at the end of the book. Raggle Gum's fraudulent reality, the truth that underlies the blandly reassuring facade of Raggle's psychologically self-induced hallucination of 1959 California, is a letdown. It's as though Cthulhu had jumped out of a crack in space and turned out to be nothing more than a stuntman in a floppy rubber suit. The subconscious metaphoric landscape of the novel has been rudely transformed into the mundanely political. This rational science fiction explanation is a betrayal of everything that has led up to it, a soothing salve that undercuts the intense paranoia subtly implanted into the novel's subtextual fabric. So Lou Stathis had the exact same opinion that I did, is that he had this fantastic build-up and you were expecting this fantastic reveal, and instead what you got was just this mundane, pedantic solution to the end of the novel that really was a letdown to it. And so it was a bit disappointing. However, there's no denying that up until that point where he hits that reveal and he has that stumble, this is a very well-written book. It's a well-written book with engaging characters who are living in just a normal town here in the United States of America that he makes very entertaining, that he makes you want to read more of, that he keeps you on the hook with his excellent writing. He keeps you there waiting for that radical reveal. And when it does happen, it is a bit of a letdown, but you can see the skill with which this book is written. And then that gets us to A Scanner Darkly. That is the next book that I read by him. This book was written in 1973, but it wasn't published until 1977. It's slightly autobiographical, and it delves deeply into the psychoses of people with serious mental issues and serious drug addictions and people who were dealing drugs and justifying why they were dealing drugs in 1994 California. It's written in the 70s, but it's about 1994 California, and it is semi-autobiographical, and it's more of just a straight fiction novel than it is an actual science fiction novel. Philip K. Dick does come in and put just a thin veneer of a science fiction, a film over the top of this story, and he had to do that in order to placate his publishers who wanted a science fiction novel, but he didn't want to write SF at this point in his career, and that was just him trying to get this book published. It is actually more of just a fiction autobiographical, a story about him and people that he knew in California with just this thin veneer of SF put over the top of it. And it's disturbing. I DNF'd this book. I got 2/3 of the way through it and I just couldn't continue with it. Not because it was badly written, it is actually written very well. But what Philip K. Dick does is he goes into the minds of these people who are suffering severe paranoia. Keep in mind that this is written in 1973, 1 year before the alien comes inside of his brain and straightens everything out. And he has severe paranoia. His characters in this book have severe paranoia. They have drug addictions and are dealing drugs. And you're rotating between these perspectives of these various characters who are living in this world of mental illness and drug addiction. And it's written by a person who is suffering mental illness and drug addiction. And for me, it was about as enjoyable as being keel-hauled. And I just couldn't continue with it. It's very well written. If that sounds like something that would be interesting to you, I would recommend it, but just be aware of what you're getting into before you start reading this book. It is very dark, it is very disturbing, but it is well written. I just couldn't finish it. It's not my cup of tea. So that brings us here to the final book in my deep dive with Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I reread it. This first published in 1968. So what is my opinion on it after a reread in 2025? I still think that this is a bad book. This is a terrible book. This book is very poorly written. It's written at about a high school level of competency, and we're not talking the class valedictorian. The main characters in here, they are flat, they are dull, they're uninteresting, they're unlikable. They start the book in that manner. They finish it in the exact same manner. They have absolutely zero character art throughout the book. The pacing in this book is reckless. It just careens from one point to the other. There's almost no descriptive imagery in it. It has this sub-theme running throughout it of these artificial animals that are produced because all the animals on planet Earth have been killed off. And so everybody is trying to buy artificial animals. And there's this status about which animal that you have. And the more complex and complicated animal that you can buy and afford, the greatest your social status is. And it's an allusion to empathy and to the robots, the androids that the main character, Deckard, hunts down here during the course of the book. But it's just executed poorly by Philip K. Dick. He hits and belabors the point over and over and over until you're just sick to death of it by the end of the story here. And he really doesn't execute it with any type of competency throughout the book. This is a bad book. I maintain that opinion here on this book. If you've read this book and you think otherwise, please go down in the comments section and tell me why you think that this is a good book. You're going to have a hard time changing my mind about it, but if you have points that you'd like to bring out that you think elucidate why this is in fact better than I'm giving it credit here for on the channel today, put it down in the comments section. I would like to read about it. So after finishing that book there, and after DNFing A Scanner Darkly, did Philip K. Dick change my mind with this deep dive with these 5 novels? And the answer to that question is yes, he did. He clearly showed me, especially with those 4 novellas in the Minority Report and other stories, and with that great setup there to Time Out of Joint, that he is a very capable writer. He's a brilliant writer at times, and he comes up with some very interesting, well thought out themes that can absolutely reach out and grab you and make you think about the universe around you and the substance of reality, and perhaps get you to look at your world in a slightly different way than you did before. And that is the hallmark of a great science fiction writer. I would read more Philip K. Dick after going through these 5 books here. I just think that I would be very careful about which books that I picked out, and I would make sure that I picked ones that had storylines that were a little bit more on the uplifting side, that steered away from some of that autobiographical drug abuse and mental illness issues that seemed to pervade a lot of his later books in his career. So that's it. Philip K. Dick was able to change my mind. My fellow booktubers were correct about Philip K. Dick being an absolutely brilliant writer that you should check out, and I do recommend him, especially that book, Minority Report. I highly recommend that book without any hesitation at all. And if you've read Philip K. Dick, if you have a favorite novel of his, again, please put it down in the comments section. I'd love to hear about it, and I'd love to hear about what it is that makes that book such a favorite of yours. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.